On 13th September 1985, Nintendo released the first Super Mario Bros. Game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It released to near unanimous critical acclaim for its revolutionary gameplay, graphics, at the time anyway, and catchy music, giving birth to one of the most iconic franchises of all time and one which dominated the 1980s gaming market. Although Sega were pretty successful when it came to arcade games, they just could not compete with the NES and Mario's selling power. Seeing this success, Sega pushed internally to create a mascot who could rival Nintendo's Super Mario in terms of popularity. Hundreds of different designs were submitted before they eventually settled on an anthropomorphic blue hedgehog. His name was Sonic the Hedgehog. The very concept behind Sonic and his speed-oriented platforming was quite ironically something that was brainstormed by Yuji Naka while attempting to speedrun the original Super Mario Bros. Back then, games had no save systems, which meant that players were starting from scratch every time they boot up their console. As a result, players would become more and more skilled with the levels every single time they played, and this was the idea Sega wanted to take to the next level with Sonic. After a few months of development, Sonic the Hedgehog was officially released in 1991 to incredible reception, with gamers astonished at how fun the process of rolling around at the speed of sound really was. Does it hold up today? Let's begin with the plot. A mad scientist who goes by the name of Dr. Ivo Robotnik, or Eggman, is looking for the Chaos Emeralds, 6 gemstones which are said to have incredible power, and is transforming animals into robots called badniks to serve as his lackeys. As Sonic, your job is to stop him. It's a very basic plot and one that's mostly told through the game manual. I missed those, by the way. What happened to them? Because there are no in-game cutscenes to be found. It was a time where plots were basically non-existent in gameplay, so this doesn't surprise me. However, I do like how each level slowly becomes more and more mechanical in nature, as if they signify you're getting closer and closer to Dr. Eggman's base of operations. Speaking of aesthetics, the pixel art on Sonic 1 is top notch. There's so much life and energy that radiates throughout every stage, and it still looks great by today's standards. Sonic's sprite in particular conveys his character perfectly through his in-game animations. You can tell so much effort was put in just to make Sonic as appealing as possible in spite of the limitations of the time, and it definitely paid off. This is some of the most fluid animation in this series even to this day. The music is also pretty fantastic if I do say so myself, with Masato Nakamura being the composer of the Blue Bear's first ever adventure. And despite it being its first ever video game OST, and having to work with the MegaDrive's limited sound font, he delivered. Oh boy, he delivered. Every piece complements the environment wonderfully, and some real classic tunes were born, such as the iconic Green Hill Zone theme. However, none of this would mean a lot if the game wasn't incredibly fun to play and control, and well... As this was the first game in the series, controls were relatively simple. Sonic can move left or right, jump, and roll to a ball to rapidly gain speed on steep slopes. This is the defining trait of all the Mega Drive 2D games in general, earning your speed through mastery of the level layouts. Sonic is decently quick on his feet as is, but by knowing when to roll and by grabbing the occasional speed tree power up, you can blast process your way through some of these levels, and it never gets old. If you're wondering how health is treated in this game, look no further than the rings scattered along the level. As long as Sonic is holding one ring on his person, he can take a hit. However, doing so will cause the rings on his person to scatter on the screen. You can drive a shield through these monitors scattered through the levels to take a hit with no financial loss, or grab an invincibility power to become impervious to damage for a short period of time. All things considered, this is a pretty ingenious system, and I imagine it was made this way to prevent frustrating deaths from running into things you couldn't see coming. There are 7 zones in Sonic 1, with each consisting of 3 acts and direct confrontation against Dr. Eggman at the end of every third level. While the bosses are simple in design and nothing really special, it's neat that Eggman fights you head on every time instead of relying on some underling or grunt to do the job for him, like Bowser does with his minions. One thing you may have noticed is that my footage is primarily based on two stages, which are Green Hill and Starlight Zone. And that's because Sonic 1's level design kind of operates like an energy drink, with insane highs, but depressing lows. The game starts off really strong with Green Hill, probably the level we spent the most time on in development, and you can tell. Lots of ways to reach the goal, fast paced action, just a good opening level all round. And then we go straight to Marble Zone, the complete opposite of what Green Hill strive to be. Slow blocky platforming, lots of waiting on blocks. It's just not really that fun to play. I'd be hard pressed to find someone who calls Marble Zone the best zone in Sonic 1 unironically. Spring Yard Zone tries to capture that Green Hill vibe with a bit more speed, but there's still a lot of slow blocky platforming that just isn't that interesting at all. But following that is probably the worst zone in the game, Labyrinth Zone. Not only is Sonic much slower underwater, but he can only last in the water for so long because of the lack of oxygen. It sucks when you're looking for a bubble, the drowning can keeps in, and you run out of time and drown. Not a very fun level to replay. Thankfully, Starlight Zone captures the magic of Green Hill much better than any level before. With tons of ways to go fast, lots of routes to explore, it's a really fun stage. But then we get to the final stage, Scrap Green. And while I do like the intense platforming and challenge it offers, it is a really unforgiving level. If you fall to the lower route at any time, you're probably gonna die. Another critique I have is regarding the special stages. If you manage to reach the end of a level with 50 rings, you're able to jump into a big ring and enter a special stage, which grants you the possibility of nabbing one of the Chaos Emeralds. First of all, reaching the end of a level with 50 rings is much easier said than done because you lose all your rings upon taking damage, meaning if you fuck up near the end it's back to square one. Secondly, the Sonic 1 special stages just aren't my cup of tea. Jumping into the big ring transports you into this rotating maze, with your end goal being to pray you last long enough to land the emerald while rolling the gold bumpers that kick you out. I don't like these special stages particularly much because it feels like I'm at the mercy of the stage whenever playing, making it impossible to get the emeralds the same way every time. Not only do they feel luck based to me, but there's really no incentive to collect them, because in Sonic 1 there's no super form. The only thing you get is a slightly different ending with a bit more flowers, and honestly, it just doesn't feel fulfilling to collect them knowing that the reward is so meaningless. After all this, what are my thoughts on Sonic 1? Well, I feel the level design is inconsistent with what it wants its focus to be, the pacing can be rather hit or miss, and the lows can be pretty painful to go through. However, I still think this title has worth today. Green Hill Zone's philosophy will later result in games that I think are truly stellar in quality, and it distinguished Sonic from Mario so much. Green Hill Zone became almost as iconic as Sonic himself during the 90s because of how fun it was to play, and for that I applaud it. The game may be my least favourite in the classic quadrilogy, but I can still enjoy myself with it. Following the success of Sonic the Hedgehog, a sequel was greenlit 5 months after its release. The development cycle of the sequel was a mess to put it lightly, with the team in charge of development being the Sega Technical Institute, or STI for short, who initially wanted a 1992 release only for Sega to decline, feeling like a year was too soon for a sequel. Most likely as a result of sales being higher than expected though, Sega did a U-turn and greenlit the sequel. Only problem was that this came 2 months after the initial proposal, giving the development team 9 months to finish the game. Yuji Naka left Sega and was slated to come back, STI had communication problems due to the mix of American and Japanese staff, and numerous stages were cut out from the final game due to time constraints and developmental hell. Despite all that though, STI managed to pull through, and in 1992, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was released. As the title of this video no doubt suggests, I think Sonic 2 is a much better game than the original for quite a few reasons. But before I get into that, I'd like to clarify what makes a sequel worthwhile for me. 1. It has to improve on flaws of the original in some form or fashion. 2. It should innovate and introduce new concepts. And 3. It should have a better understanding of the IP's identity. A great example of a sequel done right is Crash Bandicoot 2. It removed many gimmicks from the first game that didn't work, gave the orange marsupial new moves to mess around with, and made the overall adventure much more streamlined in general. On the other hand, an example of a sequel failing in almost every possible regard is Bubsy 2, but that series can wait for another time. Sonic 2, for the sake of being blunt, is a no-nonsense improvement on the original 1991 game. It took what worked and expanded on it while reducing, if not outright removing, the shit that didn't. A great example of how they went above and beyond trying to top the 1991 classic can be seen with the plot, which attempts to greatly expand the world of Sonic the Hedgehog. One day, Sonic notices a young fox called Miles per Hour. Yeah, miles per hour! Following him, who manages to keep up with Sonic due to his two Tails. Tails gets bullied often by the other foxes for his extra tail, but seeing Sonic inspired him to be just as cool as him. Realizing that Tails isn't a threat, Sonic allows him to tag along. One afternoon, Tails discovers a tornado on the beach with Sonic under its wing and approaches it to take a closer look. However, an explosion happens in the nearby forest as he's doing so. Dr. Eggman has detected the presence of the Chaos Emeralds once again, including the 7th one that appeared to be lost to time, and is after them so he can finish his famous fortress called the Death Egg. As Sonic, with Tails tagging along, your objective is to stop the Doctor from accomplishing this. While this appears to be a simple plot of face value, it A. introduces a new character and his backstory, B. reveals that there is a 7th Chaos Emerald, which also has gameplay ramifications, more on that in a bit, and C. presents Dr. Eggman as a much more sinister villain compared to the first game, increasing the stakes and making the endgame much more climactic. Mechanically, Sonic 2 improves on Sonic 1 by introducing a spin dash, a technique that has become synonymous with the Hedgehog. By holding down on the D-pad followed by the jump button, Sonic begins revving up a spin dash, which can propel you forward super fast when you release the down button. This move has become such a staple of 2D Sonic that Baymax Sonic 1 is so unbelievably painful without it. Pacing has also been significantly improved, with each stage being constructed like a roller coaster. Whether it's having to jump quickly due to crumbling platforms, or racing to avoid being crushed by a rising floor, there is a much more frenetic energy than the first game in general, with speed being a constant highlight. A good comparison that really highlights this focus is the respective water levels of each game, Labyrinth Zone and Aquatic Ruin. While the former will never be a quick level even when you know what you're doing, Aquatic Ruin allows you to skip all the slow water sections with mastery of the level layout, thank God. The icing on the cake is that zones now consist of 2 acts instead of 3, which gives Sonic 2 an incredible flow the original game just never had. The only real low point in terms of level design is Metropolis Zone, which not only has 3 acts instead of the 2 introduced in this game, making this the longest zone in the game by default. But the enemies in this level are ridiculous. You've got Astrons who split into tiny pieces and can catch you off guard at the worst moments. Shell Crackers who are incredibly annoying to hit due to their placement on the low ceiling and the extendable claw. And Slicers have some of the most horrific enemy placement I've ever seen in a video game, as well as an incredibly annoying projectile attack that can catch you off guard. You know, assuming I have the emeralds at this point, I always try getting Supersonic in the stage, but these enemies are brutal. Speaking of special stages, they have also seen a significant upgrade. Instead of needing 50 rings at the end of every level, you now need to reach a checkpoint with 50 rings, which gives you much more leeway when it comes to getting the emeralds. Jumping into the checkpoint ring warps you to the special stage, which is in this trippy world where you run in a half-pipe structure. Your objective is to collect a certain amount of rings before reaching the checkpoint, while avoiding the numerous bombs scattered around the stage. I like these special stages a hell of a lot more than the ones in Sonic 1 purely because I feel like I'm in complete control of my actions, with my only real problem with this format being Tails' delayed movements compared to yours, which can really wreck your shit in later special stages. Unlike Sonic 1 though, the emeralds are totally worth collecting though, as for the first time in the series, Sonic is able to transform into Super Sonic after collecting 50 rings, a clear homage to Dragon Ball Z's Super Saiyan. In this form, Sonic is impervious to damage, jumps higher, and is faster than usual. From a pure gameplay perspective, getting the emeralds feels fulfilling purely because you can actually feel the benefits of getting them in-game. However, I think I prefer the normal ending of Sonic 2 a little more, and let me explain why. The final boss of the game takes place on the Death Egg in space, where you're first put up against Silver Sonic, who is a total pushover, and the Death Egg robot, which Eggman gets to by outrunning Sonic? Anyway, the Death Egg robot can be a really tricky fight in itself because the hitbox for the prick is ridiculously jank. Thankfully I now know how to cheese him so he's not as bad, but this boss must have caused so many game modes for kids playing this back in the day. Once you beat the Death Egg robot, the Death Egg begins exploding, with Sonic having to jump out of it at the very last second. With no Chaos Emeralds, he begins to fall towards Earth with no means of landing safely. Oh, we have plenty of proof he'd survive before future games have anything to go off of. However, Tails notices this, and coming full circle, swoops into his sister's body one last time. After Sonic helped him discover himself, he saves Sonic from certain death, and that's why I love this ending so much more than the good one. It's simply a beautiful display of camaraderie that the game has built up throughout the entire adventure. I'm sorry if it seems like I'm undermining Sonic 1 here with this review folks. I respect it quite a bit for being the game that introduced the concept of the blue blur to the world, but Sonic 2 is just better in almost every way imaginable. With all the fundamental improvements it makes, it's not only a great Sonic game, but a great game period that I believe anyone can get into and enjoy with little to no fuss. If you haven't played it already and are a fan of platformers, I highly recommend you give it a shot. Following the first game, series creator Naoto Oshima assembled a whole new set of developers and began working on a new Sonic game for the Sega CD add-on. Spoiler warning, that didn't save it. There were essentially two games in development at the time, one being handled by the Japanese staff, Sonic CD, and the other being handled by STI, Sonic 2, with both teams opting to take different approaches in terms of level design, more on that in a bit. However, the Japanese team had way less developmental crunch compared to STI, and the main reason for this was likely that CD was a much less important game due to it not being a numbered sequel. Initially, Sonic CD started out as an enhanced port of Sonic 2, with the plan being to incorporate the Sega CD's new features into the game. However, the Japanese developers slowly formed a vision over time, which eventually led to Sonic CD becoming its own thing. The main gimmick Oshima wanted to incorporate into this new game was time traveling, which was inspired by the film Back to the Future. This was actually an idea proposed for Sonic 2, but due to memory constraints and time crunch, it was ultimately scrapped. In October 1993, in Europe anyway, Sonic CD was officially released. However, due to the failure of the Sega CD, the game would remain relatively obscure until 2011 remastered by Christian Whitehead. Just to be clear, that is the version of the game I'm reviewing today, as for all intents and purposes, it is the definitive version of the game. Is Sonic CD a great game, or has its obscurity artificially inflated its reputation amongst fans? As always, let's get into it. Before we dive into how fundamentally different Sonic CD is to its predecessors, let's dive into the plot. Sometime after the events of Sonic 1, but before Sonic 2, Sonic heads to Never Lake, which is known for being a huge lake where the mystical little planet appears for 1 month per year. It is also home to the Time Stones, which look almost exactly the same as the Chaos Emeralds did in the previous games. Anyways, they are mystical gemstones that can freely control time, and they are part of the latest Eggman scheme to conquer the world. Claiming them, the Doctor both chains Little Planet to the planet to prevent it from leaving, and uses the time stones to utterly devastate the future of the planet. Seeing this, Sonic is quick to act and makes a beeline towards the planet with the intention of foiling the Doctor's dastardly endeavours. At some point, Sonic crosses paths with Amy Rose, a pink hedgehog who went to Little Planet upon predicting an encounter with Sonic via her tarot cards. She's obsessively in love with him, and for the next few decades that will be her main personality trait, unfortunately. However, she is kidnapped by a robot called Metal Sonic, a mechanical masterpiece created by Eggman who can rival Sonic in almost every way possible. Having to save both Little Planet and Amy at this point, Sonic finds Metal Sonic and starts a speedway, where the two engage in a race with the loser dying. After Sonic wins, he frees Amy and heads to defeat the Doctor once and for all. After defeating him, the metallic shell of Little Planet crumbles, forcing the hedgehog to get off the planet with Amy. After safely getting her out of harm's way and running away from her, he notices the metallic shell crumbling. At this point, two things can happen depending on which ending you got in game. A. Little Planet successfully flies off into space, or B. Eggman, battered and bruised from his defeat, retreats on his hovercraft to the blue time stone mocking Sonic. Sonic then proceeds to utterly destroy his vehicle with powerful rock throw, but Little Planet reappears above the lake in its previous state, with the game prompting you to try again. In essence, the plot is no more complicated than the previous games. However, it adds more to the cast of characters by introducing Amy Rose and Metal Sonic. I like Amy because she's a subversion of the guy chasing the girl trope. Here, she's the one obsessed with Sonic and will go to some pretty extreme lengths in future games to make him fall head over heels for her.
Gotcha, my darling Sonic.
Amy, what are you doing here?
Sonic, this time there's no way out of marrying me.
Metal Sonic, however, is one of the greatest villains the series has ever come up with, period. His design looks incredibly sleek and mirrors Sonic incredibly well, not to mention the mere concept of an evil Sonic is just incredible stuff. He'll peak later in the series, but what a first impression he makes here. The way the story is presented has also been kicked up a notch, with an actual animated intro and outro this time as opposed to relying solely on manuals to paint the full picture. Since there's little to no dialogue in the game, manuals are needed to gather the full picture of what's going on to an extent. However, the inclusion of these shell-shaded animations is a welcome addition, and damn do they look good. Sonic CD in general is the best looking classic Sonic game of its era, with the colour palette being exquisite. Zones have never looked so bright, colourful, or bleak and depressing depending on the future you make, with each one having a distinct atmosphere about it. Sonic even gets a bunch of new sprite animations, with some making their grand return in 2017's Sonic Mania. Since I like talking about the music and presentation together, Sonic CD has an outstanding collection of tunes. The Sega CD add-on for the MegaDrive allowed CD to incorporate disc-level quality songs into their games, with the game's soundtrack no longer being held back by the MegaDrive's limited sound font. It's also the first game in the series to include vocal themes, with both the opening and ending themes being wonderful pieces of music. However, Sega of America changed the entire soundtrack for Americans, presumably to give certain stages a distinct atmosphere. And it's alright, I guess? You can tell the composers of this OST, Spencer Nielsen and David Young, tried emphasizing the seriousness and menace of how Eggman's reign over Little Planet is affecting the planet and its inhabitants. Does anyone actually live here? But most of it just blends into me as background music, not really sounding out in its own unique way. The only songs I really enjoy from it are Wacky Workbench, Bad Teacher, and the title and ending theme, Sonic Boom. The Japanese soundtrack, composed by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata, on the other hand, is a different story entirely. It currently sits my top 3 Sonic OSTs ever, having a soundtrack so good that half the time I've been writing the script for this one was spent just cherry picking certain songs to include in the video. It's hard to explain in detail why I love this OST so much, but it's just so vibrant, giving each stage a much richer feel and atmosphere than the American version. And then we have the opening and ending themes, You Can Do Anything and Believe in Yourself, which is simply outstanding in their own respective ways. Unfortunately, the rest of the game kind of meanders for me. In terms of gameplay feel, Sonic is essentially unchanged from how it was in Sonic 1, except for the fact he now has a spin dash. However, in the original release, it functioned entirely differently from how it operated in Sonic 2. You had to charge it up for a few seconds before releasing the down button, or Sonic wouldn't go anywhere. Thankfully, the 2011 remaster lets you play with a much superior version of it, which is another reason it remains the best way to play the game today, along with the Origins re-release. Just as I alluded to in the intro though, the Japanese base team decided to go in a different direction to the American base team in terms of how levels are constructed, with CD heavily encouraging exploration of levels due to the level design and CD's gimmick of time travel. As I said before, Eggman is using the time stones to destroy Little Planet's future. To stop him and get the good ending of the game, you must travel to the past by first finding a signpost with pass on it, then maintaining your speed for a couple seconds to eventually time travel and destroy the robot generators Eggman has scattered throughout the 7 zones of the game. This emphasizes the vertical nature of the level design in this game, which in turn makes level progression drag if you're going after the time stones, as you'll be going in all directions just to find that one generator in the past, assuming you even managed to get to the past in the first place. Some of the levels are also just badly designed, like Wacky Workbench and its incredibly annoying gimmick of having the floor bounce you up, making you go up to a high route where it's impossible to advance in the level. Playing a game in such a fashion gets old really quickly, but treating the levels like you would in prior games doesn't feel as gratifying, given the levels rarely have anything that can kill you. Most of them can be beaten by simply holding right and jumping a few times. Although fun, they don't reach the heights of the level design in Sonic 2. However, should you choose to ignore the generators, there's still a way to get the best ending in the game, time stones. Just like the special stages in Sonic 1, ending the stage with 50 rings and jumping into the big ring at the end will take you to a trippy dimension for a chance to claim one of the 7 time stones. In these stages, your objective is to destroy the 6 UFOs scattered around a 3-dimensional space, with water being an obstacle that causes you to lose 10 seconds of the clock for whatever reason. On the whole, I like these stages, but the later ones can kiss my ass because of how stingy they are with the time limit and how spread out the UFOs are. The bosses in this game take a really interesting approach, because for most of them you're trying to find out how to damage them in the first place, which leads to some truly unique encounters, barring the first boss, which is one of the most pathetic I've ever seen in a Sonic game. The race against Metal Sonic is one of the highlights of the game, as you're racing this metallic version of yourself in Stardust Speedway while Eggman is chasing you with an insta-death laser?
You complete and utter imbecile! How long have you had this for? Why have you never incorporated it into other mechs or levels? Why did you call the egg dealer your latest and greatest creation when you have something that kills your nemesis in one hit?
Anyway, bosses in Sonic CD are pretty distinctive and stand out among the classic games due to a different approach to the encounters, which I appreciate. On the whole though, Sonic CD is kind of a mixed bag for me. I love the aesthetic and music, the level teams are top and Sonic is fun to control. However, the time travel gimmick, while a neat idea on paper, is kind of clunky in execution. Level progression is an absolute mess due to the gimmick, and the game is less fulfilling and ridiculously short when you decide to just get the time stones for the good ending. While I'd still rather play this over Sonic 1, it doesn't hold a candle to Sonic 2, and especially Sonic 3. It's available as part of the Sonic Origins Classic Collection these days, so I'd recommend you to try it out and see whether you liked it more than I did. After the huge success of Sonic 2, Sonic was now a household name with plenty of children around the globe eagerly anticipating the next entry in the series. Wanting to capitalize on this success, Sega once again contracted the Sega Technical Institute along with veteran game creators Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yoshihara to create the third numbered entry in the series. At first, the plan was to create a much larger game than Sonic 2. However, and I'm not kidding with this part, the game was split into two because of a McDonald's promotion. Spoiler warning, this won't be the last time Sega make utterly baffling decisions. The two halves of the game, both released in 1994, were called Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles respectively. However, due to the famous lock-on technology Sega came up with sometime between Sonic 1 and 2, they were able to fulfill their initial vision by allowing you to combine the cartridges of both Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, with the combination of the two going by the name Sonic 3 and Knuckles. To me, this is the true way to play the game due to this being the initial vision by the developers. Hence, I will always view the game in the state it was supposed to be released in. For some added context, the version of the game I'll be looking at is Sonic 3 Angel Island Revisited, a fan game by Yukuro, which is the definitive version of the game by a long shot in my opinion, with a ton of customizable options, widescreen support, and most importantly in my eyes, mod support, which means I can do shit like this. But enough of the developmental cycle talk. Let's get into why Sonic 3 and Knuckles is my favourite 2D Sonic game ever. Seeing as this game's plot is much more integrated into the core gameplay, I'll go over a different format for this video. Instead of splitting the video into sections like previously, I'll instead attempt to group all my thoughts into one cohesive part. The game kicks off immediately after the events of Sonic 2, with the Death Egg crashing onto Angel Island after exploding in the last game. At some point after crash landing onto the island, Eggman meets Knuckles the Echidna, the guardian of Angel Island. Realizing what Knuckles is, the Doctor tells him Sonic and Tails are evil and plotting to steal the Master Emerald. Leaving Eggman, Knuckles forms an alliance with him to defeat Sonic. Meanwhile, Sonic and Tails head to Angel Island after discovering a strange energy out at sea, with Sonic transforming into a super state to wrap things up quickly. However, Knuckles punches the super right out of Sonic and steals the emeralds, forcing Sonic to reclaim them. As seen with that opening cutscene, this is the first game in the series to have cutscenes integrated into the actual levels. Although they're simple and have no dialogue, it's a welcome addition to the series, and one that makes the worlds you travel through in-game feel connected. The act of traversing through levels is essentially unchanged from Sonic 2, with speed being a constant focus throughout the game. However, a couple of things have been added to this game, one of them being the Insta-Shield and the other being the Elemental Shields. The Insta-Shield, activated by pressing the jump button twice without a shield, is a temporary barrier Sonic forms around him which grants invincibility frames and a little extra reach. It's great for dealing with annoying enemies like Orbonauts and getting in some picky hits and boss encounters. The Elemental Shields, however, are much more interesting. Hidden throughout the zones of the game are three types of shields: the Electric Shield, the Bubble Shield, and the Fire Shield. Not only do all these shields protect Sonic from damage, but they each make him impervious to certain environmental hazards and give Sonic extra moves to play around with. For instance, the Fire Shield gives Sonic a mid-air dash, the Bubble Shield gives him the bounce attack, and the Electric Shield gives him a double jump. These shields are a fantastic addition to the game as they spice up the gameplay enough for Sonic. I'll get back to the other characters in a bit. Anyway, zones are much more dynamic in Sonic 3 than in any game prior. You see this as soon as the first level, where Eggman's robot torches Angel Island in the first act, changing the level aesthetic. Additionally, upon beating said robot at the end of the act, which in itself is the first time each act has ever had a boss fight, the second act starts where you left off, making the world feel much more connected. That's not all, however, as each act has its own musical theme, making each of them feel fresh and distinct from one another. Holy shit, the music in this game. The mystery behind Sonic 3's OST has to be one of the most interesting topics about the game. with several tracks in the game being uncredited. However, it has been confirmed that Michael Jackson did work on some of the OST, with the removal of certain songs in future releases confirming that theory. There's honestly a lot more to it than what I'm covering here, but legal issues with the OST aren't really my point of interest when looking at a video game. If you're really interested in the mess that went on behind the scenes, go watch ChowMix's video on it, which covers things much more in depth than I could ever dream of, link in the description. What does matter, however, is that the music is pretty damn good. Need I say more? Anyways, as I stated earlier, Sonic lost the Chaos Emeralds at the start of the game and he must find them all again to save the planet. This time, instead of needing 50 rings to either jump into a big ring at the end of a level or use a checkpoint to warp to a special stage, you instead find big rings hidden throughout the level, with no prerequisites needed to enter them. A much better system than the one in Sonic 2 simply because there's much less stress when hunting for the emeralds. In this variation of special stage, you run around in an area with the goal of collecting blue spheres, while avoiding the red ones which instantly make you fail the stage. The longer you stay in a special stage, the faster Sonic moves, which makes the music speed up and makes the pacing more frantic. I find these to be the best special stages yet. They're extremely satisfying to complete even in the original MegaDrive release, as none of the draw distance issues I had with the previous games apply here, and they're just more enjoyable to complete in general. IJ from the future here. While editing this video, I realised I completely forgot to talk about the bonus stages, which are reached by jumping into a checkpoint with a certain wing threshold. There are 3 variants, one similar in aesthetic to Sonic 1 special stages, with a slot machine to earn you extra rings, one where you use these rotating orbs to catapult yourself to the top and hopefully grab some goodies along the way, my personal favourite. And the gumball machine stage, where you use the bumpers on the side to push yourself up to the machine and get power-ups. If you want my thoughts on them, they're all helpful minigames that can better equip you for the level ahead. Now back to the video. But back to the meat of the video. After defeating Eggman in Angel Island Zone, Sonic will go through a number of levels before reaching Eggman's launch base. With Hydro City, Marble Garden, Carnival Night and Ice Cap. And man, what a journey it is. There isn't a single level here I dread playing. Not a single level. Whether it's running on water in the Hydro City, using the spinning tops in Marble Garden, getting the emeralds earlier and abusing Supersonic to skip the slower parts of Carnival Night, or that snowboarding sequence in Ice Cap. I just find these levels to be remarkably fulfilling to play, with a great balance of speed, platforming and exploration to boot. After all that though, Sonic and Tails arrive at Launch Base Zone, where Eggman has almost finished rebuilding the Death Egg with his spaceship attempting to lift it back into space. However, after defeating the Fat Man in battle, the Death Egg plummets back down to Angel Island, ending the Sonic 3 portion of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In February 1994, this was the ending players around the globe got. However, inputting codes for debug mode would reveal levels that weren't in the game, confusing many players. 8 months later however, players will get what is essentially the second half of the package with the Sonic and Knuckles portion of the game. As I explained earlier, the cartridge for Sonic and Knuckles was a specially designed one that allowed you to connect your Sonic 3 cartridge to it, giving you the complete game I'm reviewing today. But enough of the history lesson, let's get to the game. Following the events of Sonic 3, Sonic and Tails land in Mushroom Hill, and push forward with their quest to destroy the Death Egg. However, they spot Knuckles appearing to hide something of importance to him. Checking out the hidden room, Sonic and Tails come across the Hidden Palace, which is an altar containing the 7 Super Emeralds, large gemstones that are fueled by the Chaos Emeralds. Sonic and Tails end up relinquishing the Chaos Emeralds, meaning you can't abuse Supersonic to cheese the second half of the game, and with more questions than answers at this point, Sonic and Tails decide to power up the Super Emeralds, stop Eggman from relaunching the Death Egg, and discovering the mystery of Hidden Palace Zone. Like the Sonic 3 portion, you have to get through a few levels before reaching the Death Egg, which crash landed in Lava Reef. You've got Mushroom Hill, Flying Battery, and Sandopolis. 2 of those levels are really fun. And then there's Sandopolis, which is my least favourite level in the game, if only because of the slow puzzle elements its second act in particular is filled to the brim with. As stated before, Sonic and Tails have given up the Chaos Emeralds in order to power the Super Emeralds, which means you have to go for those now. And those special stages introduce new elements, such as yellow spears which catapult you far across the stage. They are by far the most difficult in the game, but getting the Super Emeralds unlocks something pretty special. Hypersonic is ridiculous. Besides being faster than Supersonic and jumping higher, he possesses all the best qualities of the elemental shields. He can double jump like the electric shield, do a dash forward like the fire shield, and breathe underwater like the bubble shield. In addition, both of the first 2 are screen nuke which kill every enemy on the screen. This is the only game he appears in though, so don't get too used to him. After arriving on Lava Reef, Sonic and Tails locate the Death Egg, which uses its lasers to reactivate the volcano. The duo survive this attack and come across Hidden Palace Zone, beating Knuckles for the final time in his pathetic last stand. However, after Knuckles is defeated, he notices Eggman stealing the Master Emerald for himself. Knuckles tries to stop him but fails and gets electrocuted. finally realizing that Eggman was a con man and the two woodland creatures were in fact good guys. Idiot.
Shut up!
The Echidna decides to help Sonic and Tails advance to Sky Sanctuary, where they deal with the remaining Eggman forces and jump onto the rising Death Egg at the very last second to foil the Doctor once and for all. After getting through Eggman's various contraptions, Sonic and Tails defeat Eggman, which causes the Death Egg to explode. However, Eggman flees the scene with the Master Emerald, prompting Sonic to transform into Super/Hyper Sonic and take him down once and for all. With the day saved, Sonic and Tails return the Master Emerald to Angel Island, which begins floating once again as a grateful Knuckles smiles on, ending Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and earning my heartfelt applause as the journey comes to a close. Man, what a journey. This truly was the biggest and most ambitious Sonic game of its time. What's most impressive about it is how much of the story is told through a 16-bit game with no dialogue at all. You get introduced to Knuckles the Echidna, who goes through a distinct arc as he goes from being an enemy of Sonic, using his knowledge of the island to send him to more dangerous routes, to realizing he's not the enemy and was tricked by the Doctor. Back in its time, this shit was revolutionary as other mascot platformers didn't have plots or lore that was nearly as fleshed out as the Sonic the Hedgehog series, separating it from its contemporaries. This was also a pretty meaty game as you had 3 playable characters to choose from: Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, each with a similar gameplay style but rocking their own abilities that made them stand out. Sonic could use the elemental shields and the Insta Shield, Tails could fly and swim for brief periods of time, and Knuckles could glide and climb walls. It's worth noting that Knuckles has a slightly different story to Sonic, with his adventure taking place after the main campaign. One of Eggman's robots gains sentience and becomes the main villain of the story, with Knuckles setting out to stop him. Some level designs and bosses become different with Knuckles, as he's able to access routes Sonic and Co couldn't. Nothing radically different, but his campaign is considered the hard mode of the game. Like Sonic, he is able to transform into both Super and Hyper states after collecting the respective emeralds. His Hyper form, however, comes with the benefit of being able to kill every enemy on screen after colliding with a wall during a glide, instead of what I mentioned for Sonic. Tails, on the other hand, gets no transformation whatsoever with the Chaos Emeralds, but does with the Super Emeralds. This was always strange to me, but Super Tails is well worth the effort as he is insanely broken. Faster flight, a higher jump, and a flock of flickies who destroy any enemy on screen. But honestly, what more can I say on this game? From its beautiful sprite work, to the level of care given to the plot, to the insane level design and length of the game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is just a phenomenal experience that you won't forget playing. This game, in my opinion, should be on every gamer's bucket list and is a top 5 Sonic game of all time.